Previously on Civic Sci TV Africa with Stephanie Okeyo.
So it literally is like the podcasting showed us that, where traditional media is headed is the opposite direction of what audiences want, at least young audiences, mostly women, but also there are a lot of men as well, lots of male identifying audiences. So that just told us, the future is quite different from what the past has been. And that's interesting, and so that's worth investing in further, because young people are saying this is what we want. And also it tracks with how traditional media, at least in Kenya, they're faltering, they're struggling a lot with their sustainability, and I think it's because of that, because they're not where the audiences now currently are.
Hello, today we are joined by Anne Chisa. She's a scientist and the host and founder of the Roots of Science podcast. I'm going to let Anne Chisa introduce herself and her work.
Thank you so much, Steph. Hello, everyone. Like you rightfully said, my name is Anne Chisa. I am a scientist, but the core and the person who I love, the version of myself, is a science communicator. I'm the founder of the Root of the Science Media, which we fully incorporated last year, 2023. And under that, there is the Root of the Science podcast, which I founded and I host since 2020. I love science communication. I love the idea of, knowledge transfer. And that's in essence what I do with the platform that I have.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned you're a scientist. In which discipline are you in?
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So crop science, which is agriculture. I'm doing my PhD. It's got its ups and downs, but I think the journey has really made me appreciate what I do even more, because I have a thorough understanding of the behind the scenes of the people who I'm interviewing, and also I believe the people who want to hear the information. So it's like I'm the go-between. So crop science, that's what I do.
And as somebody who's from a science background, what really sparked into getting into science communication first, or having this interest of science communication, science education?
Oh, perfect. I love that question, Steph. Thanks. So for me, science communication, I had no idea what it was. I stumbled into it. So it was during 2020. I had just finished, submitted my master's at that point. And I was in this sort of limbo. So like I rightfully said, I do agriculture. So I was working with farmers for my research. And, when you're submitting your thesis or dissertation, most supervisors, rightfully so, would like you to publish your work because, you've done the work, so let it be published. But I was sort of in this weird space of like, okay, even if I publish, like the people who I was working with, how are they going to get this information? Because the way that we write science and in our scientific landscape, academia specifically rather, it does not account the everyday person. Like no everyday person goes and says, I'm going to read, plant and soil, just to say a fact. And even us as people in academia, we are so specialized in the type of work. Like, somebody can be molecular biology. They're not going to go and read on soil science unless it overlaps with them, vice versa. So I was kind of like, so what? Like, how am I going to get this information back to my people? And similarly, at that time, being on the edge, I was following a lot of my colleagues who were running the experiments, and I was like trying to figure out what they were doing. And a dear friend of mine, she was working on human excreta, so urine and feces, and they were using that to create fertilizers to grow food. So they were testing that, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is so interesting. And I started talking to her, and I thought I'd do a write-up. Then I was like, oh hell no, I just wrote a thesis. There's no way. Yeah. I'm not gonna do any more writing. So I was like, let me just let me just chat to her. And that's how it started. We recorded an episode, put some questions, and then we put it out. So that was basically it. It was during my master's. I wanted to find a different way of getting all of this research that we as researchers do back to the people who we are doing this research for, in essence.
That's quite interesting because it shapes the type of content you are through your lived experience. And if you look at the roots of or your podcast, it has the narrative around the scientist rather than the science itself. So how comes you took that approach in terms of highlighting the people behind it or around it or within it, whichever way we would like to put it?
Yeah, I mean, because like you rightfully said, it was a lived experience. I knew what it was like my master's, and even now with this PhD, it's been such a humbling journey. And sometimes we tend to focus so much on the science, which is important, but I realize that there's a human behind that research. And that's why my podcast is the root of the science. I want to know who you are, like, okay, well, why you did it in terms of the research, who's it impacting, but also who are you? Who is Anne? Like rightfully now, I am a scientist, I'm doing my PhD, but I also have this company that is by myself, and I'm now a science communicator. Like there's so much more to me than just being this straight and narrow box. So that was really what I wanted to push. And I suppose maybe it was a bit of a selfish thing because I wanted to feel validated that what I'm doing, there are people like me who do other things. Because I don't know if the other listeners who are in this academic space, it's a very straight line that really does not allow you to color outside of the box. And I got that even when I was doing this. It was like, this is a waste of time. What are you doing? This doesn't make sense. Just do your research. When you finish, you can do this for your postdoc. But I was like, no, this is something that I have to do. And I realized that these two areas of my life, they have to work concurrently. Sure, the balance, some people might argue, sure, because that was always a question, how do I balance the two? I don't. And I want to be flat out. Like, I don't. But I realized that I need the two because I think it was really, really difficult actually accepting that for myself, that these two things are who I am, because like I said, that box really was like, no, you need to stay here. So that's what I wanted to do. And that's what we did. That was really the primary focus in the first couple of years. Spoke to amazing array of Africans all over the globe. And that was also another thing that we wanted to showcase, that these are Africans. Like when we think of a scientist growing up, it was that stereotypical image of a, old white man. We didn't have pictures of yourself and I, people look, a girl with red hair, what? Red lipstick as a scientist? Get out of here. Those are not images that were perpetuated for us. And I wanted to show that as visible role models and to showcase that, like, these scientists are all over the world and they're Africans and they're doing really brilliant work. So that was the essence. That was why we went like the root of the science. As much as we're talking on the scientific aspect, we also wanted to know the human. And although the journey and the themes of the podcast have evolved, that is still at the core. I still try to keep that at the core in the conversations that we do.
And speaking of evolution, because you've done this for 4 years now, what do you think were the challenges? Have they remained the same when you started and now, or they've evolved over time?
Oh, the challenges have evolved. So I think in the beginning, it's the first, what am I doing? Like, I don't know what I'm doing. Even when I tell people what I'm doing, because in 2020, what is a podcast? Everybody knew YouTube and blogs. Like, nobody knew what it was. Even Spotify was only available in Kenya, South Africa, Egypt, and Nigeria, 4 African countries at that point in the early 2020s. It was only later that it was available in other parts of Africa. And I was trying to make a podcast about Africans. So people are like, hey, we can't listen to it in our in our locality, in our regions. So those are some of the things. But of course, these hosting platforms also evolved. And then we were able to be more readily available. Then it went from, okay, I was doing this all by myself. Okay, how am I able to do all of this and do everything? Now that was a challenge. Then finding people, that was another challenge. Like, how do I translate this vision that I have in my head to other people? Okay, fine. You now have a team. You're doing this out of your pocket. It's really unsustainable. How are you, as much as it's a passion, you have to survive, you know? That's another evolution that I went into. Like, now, how do I start thinking of this as more than just a passion project? You know, how do I attract people to come in and say this is something that they should invest? Where? Like, how? What is there? Like, all of those things. Okay, fine. You found these people. Wait a minute. You now have to start thinking like a business person. You now have to start thinking of accounting and financing, because when people do give you some money, you need to account for it. But you did science. You didn't do accounting. I ran away from accounting, but now I'm back here. So, you know, like Jay-Z says, like, 99 problems every single time. There's always going to be, with change, the problems change, the problems evolve. So yeah, but I mean, I don't say that in a bad way. It's really forced me to grow as well, because the person who I was in the beginning of this to where I am now, night and day. And it's because of these challenges that have forced me to be like, hey, okay. So yeah.
And speaking of challenges, because with every challenge there is an opportunity, or how I believe. What opportunities have the Roots of Science podcast opened for you that were unexpected?
Oh my goodness, where do I even start? I mean, it's made me more confident in terms of being a really good speaker. I know how to speak. I don't have that fear as much as, of course it's there, but I mean, I can come on and be like, okay, what I'm going to say, you know, I need to say it. It's allowed me to get really amazing awards and recognition for things that, you know, I didn't know. It's allowed me to travel, to see the world because of the work that I've done. The networks, the people who I've met interviewing, who have become friends, you know, like yourself, and even just networks for other opportunities and other things. So these are things that I didn't even know would come from this. So goodness, the challenges are a lot, but the opportunities that have come from this are so many. And that's what I'm saying, that I'm really grateful, because if it wasn't for the evolution and the growth, we wouldn't be here.
Don't go away. The conversation will continue momentarily after this special highlight.
Problem: you're doing cutting-edge research that the public doesn't understand. You're incredibly busy, and outreach takes a lot of time. The solution: Galactic Polymath, an education studio that helps you connect to the most important audience for growing STEM literacy, K-12 classrooms. So, how do we connect your research to the classroom? At Galactic Polymath, we create beautiful visuals to communicate your science, design engaging lessons around your data,
analyze our data and find out for yourself,
align to teacher standards and practices, help you complete outreach on a funded grant, and win grants by having stellar broader impacts, ultimately simplifying your outreach efforts. Hire us. Let's turn your research into lessons that inspire. Real research, real people, real data, real careers, real learning. Find out more at galacticpolymath.com or email us at info@galacticpolymath.com.
And it's been actually, as you're describing, a learning phase for you. What has been the greatest insights you've had running this program so far?
Okay, so personally, as a scientist, it's made me realize that I think I had some my own insecurities when I was doing my work, and because it was hard, it made me second guess if I'm really meant to be in this space. But speaking to a lot of people and them sharing their journey, I'm like, oh, so this happens? Like, this has happened to you? Like, you also got rejected? Like, okay, your journey wasn't as straight, and then you actually got through it. So it was that one thing where it kind of made me realize, like, oh, okay, like, these things happen. These things that are happening to you are not just in isolation. You're not the only one. Because I think as researchers, when you're doing postgraduate studies, you usually do a project by yourself. So you're really in a silo, and you look at people from afar and you think, oh my goodness, everybody's progressing. But once you start having these really wonderful conversations and people start to be very vulnerable about mental health, about funding, about visa issues, all of these issues which we are Africans, we all face. And I'm like, oh, wow, and it's not. And then I realized when these stories are also shared, other people realize that. So I learned that personally, that my challenges are not I'm not the only one going through it. And even though it feels like I can't do it, I can. It's just going to be really, really hard, but I will finally get to the end of the line. In terms of podcasting, I've learned that I'm really good at what I do, number one. Number two, I've learned that there's always room for improvement. There's always room for learning, and it sometimes comes in really odd ways. And to as much as I can say I'm really good at what I do, but also learn that, hey, I don't know everything. So even when I say it like that. And another thing is that I've learned that this podcast platform is so much bigger than me. It's not about, Anne Chisa and her doing all of these amazing things, but it's really about what we are as Africans are doing. And I get the privilege and the honor to just be that go-between, that platform that amplifies that work. And when I see, like, let's say, for example, somebody gets like an episode and somebody gets a connection and they're like, hey, somebody heard me on your show, and they reached out and they contacted me, and I'm like, oh my goodness, okay, because of that conversation, or because of my networks, people will reach out to me and they're like, we're looking for A, B, C, D, would you recommend someone for XYZ? And I'm like, yeah, this is why, because it's so much bigger than me, and we've created a really wonderful platform as being a credible source of information, but also a credible source of networks. And that's just been, I think that's been the best part. Like I said, it's not just about me, and seeing that has just been magnificent.
And speaking of networks, how far has you reached? How far is your reach at the moment with your work?
Okay. We are available in 100 and I don't know. I want to say 126 or 136 countries when we were doing some stats. We've got over, I think, 19,000 downloads. We have over 134 episodes. So that's basically over 120 something Africans who we have interviewed. We are now growing and really establishing some partnerships, which is great. And having real experts. So we have that validity, like we have experts and particular opinions, but it's still at the core. I still want it to be that platform where we can amplify someone who's not, who hasn't made it as such, because that was the beauty and that was the essence. So, yeah, and we've transitioned to not only just doing audio, we also on video. We are on YouTube. We're expanding that reach. We have a newsletter as well. We realized that our listeners, or our, what do we call it? I don't want to say viewers, but our audience. Yeah, that's the word. Our audience consumes media in various different ways. So we now understood that instead of just doing the audio, we need the video, and also some people love to read. So we are trying to reach people in that particular way. So we have a newsletter that's also growing with about, I think, 1,500 subscribers, which is just really amazing. So we get to post that as well. Steadily growing.
Yeah, quite a growing reach and also platforms. And for you, I think when personally, I started looking at podcasts. Yours was the first one. And from my network, my personal network, you're one of the first people frontiering in this space. What do you think is needed to facilitate and encourage more science podcasts within the continent?
That's a great question. I want to say we need more support, because creating a podcast doesn't just happen. There's so many technicalities for it to be really good. And for us to compete at the level, because there's so many podcasts globally. And as Africans are well aware that, we have great podcasts, but we can't reach in those levels where these great podcasts, which have all of this, audience, because we are so limited by our, we are so limited by our limits in terms of, digital access, etc. So we need financial support. And I'm going to be very honest about that, because that has really changed the way that we even, do the content. Because there's seasons where if there's no finances, how am I going to pay my podcasting? How am I going to get data? All of those things. So that's like number one. But I think we also have to understand as creators that we have a niche. So as much as there might be these Joe Rogans who are getting 1.5 million, you have to understand and you have to honor your audience, even if they are just 50. I think it's important to honor your audience and to honor that you've got a growing, steady audience, instead of saying, oh no, we'll never be there, we're not doing great. But you have 50 people every single time listening to you. I think we really need to start honoring that, instead of just focusing on the hype of numbers and being viral, which is great, of course, but I think sometimes that's where people give up. Science is a niche. Science is such a niche subject, and then it becomes even more niche when you specify, let's say, if you're talking about agriculture, if you're talking about biology, or if you're talking about immunology. So there is a niche. I'm not saying that we can't overlap, but we have to understand that as well. So I think it's an understanding that we are in the niche, and also maybe start learning how can you honor, so that these guests, these 50 people that you have who are consistently coming to you, tell another 10 people, another 50 people, and then that's how you grow. So really honoring that slow burn, because I think everybody now, pardon me, is trying so hard to be like 20,000 downloads or 20,000 people. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I think sometimes when you just forget on what's important, like be consistent. Really, maybe we need, I don't know if I want to say we need like support groups, but because many people didn't know where to even start, or what is a career journey of being a science podcaster. How can it be something that I do seriously? Those are some of the questions. So I think there needs to be some financial support, and also I just think even just social capital support in terms of training and facilitating all of those things. But I think also at the same time, we as creators need to honor our niche audience and be grateful for them who keep on coming back.
Yeah, and it's interesting you're talking of financial support in an area where numbers or statistics becomes a big, the big discussion. So if you were to give advice for funding structure or model, particularly, whereby you see in podcasts, it's numbers, and you're talking of financial support, how do you make this this selection or distribution of funding a little bit equitable and also inclusive and diverse? I know that's such a
that's such a tough question.
Yes. Because the numbers become the big thing now.
Yeah. No, rightfully so. And it's valid. I mean, any person wants to know that if I'm giving you money, where's it going? What is it doing? So the numbers game is true. But then I think that's what I'm saying, that that's where consistency comes in, because if you can pitch yourself and say, okay, I am doing a podcast on science, I don't know, science innovators or whatever, and I've been doing it for over a year or over 8 months. And these are my audiences. I have 80 people, 80 people who are listening to me, and I can show you where they are. And I can see the steady growth. I think if you pitch yourself in that way and say, this is where I want to go and this is what I want to do, then maybe you can have that. But like you rightfully said, numbers matter. Yeah, so I think it's about how you pitch yourself, how to be innovative and be upfront that I'm in a niche setting. But I've garnered an audience, I have been consistent, and I think that's it, because it gets really hard to, if I can be honest, that's how I sort of packaged myself, because I don't have 1.5 million people listening to me every week, but I know that I've been doing this, and I show over period that this is what I've been doing. These are the people who keep coming back. These are where they are. Sure, we're not at 1.5 million people, but we're gonna get there. But in order for me to get there, I need money so that maybe I can hire staff and PR to help me market myself better, So of course, and then you also have to fit in the right donors who maybe at 80 people, you can't ask for $1 million, because what are you going to do with $1 million, $1 million? But maybe find the bracket where it can make sense. So start with a micro grant or micro investment, then grow to middle. So that's what I'm saying. You really have to honor the small burn and really understand where you are. But if you can have that one episode that goes viral and you've made it to 1 million, congratulations to you.
Yeah. Where do you see the roots of podcast in 5 years to come?
Love this question. It's my favorite. I always say that I want to be the Oprah of science, and I'm going to say that and keep saying it until it happens, and people will take these links and say she said it. So definitely I want to create this premier platform of Africans in STEM globally. Want it to be on demand and live, because I think these types of conversations should be readily and accessibly available. So that's sort of where we see it in terms of the visual content. I also want to do the written aspect, so really grow that division as well with the newsletters, and not only about me, hopefully create a potential career path for other science communicators like myself using this platform. So I've realized that although I'm a crop scientist, I don't know much about astrophysics and astronomy, but if you, like myself, love science and communicating it, but your speciality rather is in, for example, astronomy, this can be that platform where you can have a podcast, write pieces or climate change, whatever. So that's sort of also where I want. That's why I also envision it. So the idea, maybe I should start with the idea is to create Root of the Science Media as an umbrella of online digital media, be it audio, be it video, be it written, and also capacity building, because I've realized that with my conversations with scientists, there's some aspects of media training that needs to happen in terms of how scientists communicate, because they want to, but sometimes they don't know how to. And it's a 5-minute interview, but you're thinking of it as a presentation and you can't speak like that. So to do some capacity building in terms of that. So that's the idea. Working with policy. I don't know how I'm going to do that part yet, but I don't have to do everything. There'll be some really amazing people who will be able to assist me in this part, but also to do the policy aspect, the policy wing. Okay, great. We're doing all of this scientific work, but how does it translate to policy in terms of the people who really make sure that these things are incorporated into our society? So that's the umbrella that I see the Root of the Science Media, the Root of the Science as an organization in 5 years and 10 years. But yeah, That's
you
the
so
goal.
much.
That's the vision.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful way of seeing how your story has moved from more of a self-discovery to now more of thinking of a community and expansion and moving from self to others, if that makes sense, and growing people also within that. We thank you so much for taking the time. We're looking forward to see how much the Roots of Science podcast grows, and looking forward to more episodes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you. This was lovely.